Everything begins in a peaceful and cozy little village where, inside one of the homes, a family waits with great anticipation to discover which class the son will be blessed with, even though he doesn't seem nearly as excited as the rest. His little sister, however, is overjoyed, already certain that her brother Errol will receive the most powerful class of all. Their mother comments that, if that's true, he'll probably become very popular with the girls, but the jealous younger sister quickly argues that Errol is far too young to be thinking about such things. Their father adds that, at Errol's age, he himself was always surrounded by pretty girls, but none of this seems to impress his son, who remains distant from the conversation, even though the idea of being granted a class is also on his mind. In this world, the goddess blesses every human with a class upon reaching the age of 10. Along with it come the skills necessary to perform that role, which could range from being a mighty sorcerer to something as simple as a village baker. After the family gathering, the long-awaited day finally arrives. The ritual of blessing begins, and one of the community's priests steps forward in the town's temple, standing before a statue of the goddess. Soon, the first child is called to the stage. The priest touches his staff to the boy's forehead and immediately feels the power of flames, along with the scent of iron and hammer. With that, the boy is declared a blacksmith. As time goes on and the children present themselves one by one to receive their classes, Errol's sister is brimming with pride over their family's bloodline, convinced it will influence the blessing and grant her brother a powerful class. When Errol's name is finally called, everyone holds their breath, eager to know the future of the village's most famous couple's child, the Sword Princess Farah and the Archmage Leon, both renowned for their advanced classes. On stage, the priest instructs Errol to close his eyes so that he may feel the goddess's blessing, but the boy feels nothing. The priest, too, senses nothing at all. The audience begins to murmur in unease at the absence of any response. After carefully analyzing this rare case, the priest delivers his conclusion. Errol is a child with no class. His sister protests in outrage, refusing to accept it, while his parents are left deeply disappointed. Afterward, Errol is back at home, practicing with a sword in the yard. While his parents try to console him, they explain that he doesn't need to worry about getting a job, since they will still work even after retirement. But Errol insists that he doesn't want to be a burden. His little sister, trying to act like the older one, promises to help him just as she always has. Frustrated at always being treated as pitiful, Errol calls his family together and makes one thing clear. He doesn't care about being classless. He has been studying fencing with his mother since childhood, and even if he didn't receive a class, he can still wield a sword. One day, his hard work will pay off. His mother is moved by his maturity at such a young age, and his father believes that Errol will be able to turn fate to his favor when he grows older, just as his sister has always believed her big brother is the best. Still tired of all the sentiment, Errol excuses himself and goes to the training grounds. When he arrives, two boys are sparring, each showing impressive sword techniques. They boast about how amazing it is to have a class, since they can feel strength flowing naturally from within. When Errol approaches, they immediately recognize him as the classless boy from the ritual and ask what he's doing there. Errol explains that he came to train like anyone else. One of them smirks, saying that as swordsmen they don't even need to train. Coming here is just to test their abilities. To prove it, he calls his partner back, and the two resume their duel, once again demonstrating a power Errol never had, and, in their eyes, never will. Each strike echoes through the air with such force that it feels as if two grown warriors were clashing rather than children. Watching carefully, Errol thinks to himself that the first technique any swordsman learns is basic fencing, which alone makes them skilled fighters. But he doesn't want to just stand by and watch. He calls out, challenging either of them to spar. The cockier boy bursts out laughing, mocking him, but Errol answers with confidence, saying it will still be a fair fight. Enraged by his certainty, the boy demands to know if Errol at least has the goddess's divine protection. Even without a class, Errol replies that he does. Divine protection is another blessing from the goddess, but unlike classes, it is granted to every human at birth. It is like an invisible web that surrounds the body and absorbs damage. Still, if one takes too many hits, the pain eventually comes through. Satisfied with that, the arrogant boy agrees to fight, though Errol warns him to be ready to eat his words. The taunt makes him furious, and in a burst of anger, he charges before the duel is even officially started. Errol reacts swiftly, not only blocking the strike, but twisting his blade to break the boy's guard. This only fuels the boy's rage. He swings again, but Errol blocks once more. From then on, the fight is firmly under Errol's control. Unwilling to accept defeat, the arrogant boy calls his partner to join in, and the other quickly agrees. Errol narrowly avoids a cowardly strike from behind. But he doesn't complain, he relishes the challenge. Fighting two opponents his own age feels like useful training, especially compared to the countless beatings he's taken from his mother at home. In the heat of the fight, the arrogant boy scolds his partner for attacking poorly, which makes Errol wonder if people with classes ever learn teamwork. Judging by the chaotic way they fight, maybe they're easier prey than they think. Convinced of this, Errol steps forward and knocks down the scrawny one of the duo with a sharp blow of his sword's hilt to the chin. Now there's only the alpha left, the so-called final boss, who threatens his opponent with big words. But when it's time to prove himself, he trips over his own partner and leaves himself wide open. Errol smacks the back of his neck with the flat of the blade, he doesn't even use the edge. Otherwise, heads would have rolled. As if losing under those conditions wasn't humiliating enough, the pair still mutters that Errol cheated. Since they won't accept defeat, the three of them agree to a rematch. But before it can happen, another boy steps into the training grounds and tells the losers to cut it out because in a real battlefield, no enemy will care about the whining of two clowns. The cocky one immediately curses him, but his partner tells him to pipe down, since that redhead is serious trouble. The redhead approaches Errol and recognizes him as the son of Farah, the sword princess, pointing out that only her son could handle a blade with that kind of skill. Even so, he warns Errol not to let victory get to his head. Then, he challenges him to a duel, just to show this so-called classless boy what a true swordsman is capable of. The skinny one whispers to the cocky one that the redhead has ties to the captain of the guard, and the redhead himself confirms Captain Evans is his father. At the mention of that name, Errol remembers Evans as the man who once came to his house to call his mother out on a demon hunt. The son, however, looks nothing like him. The father's appearance was far harsher and worn. The redhead bristles at hearing his father's name and makes it clear that not only is the captain a master of the sword, he's also a respected leader among all. Still, the son can't understand how Errol's mother could be considered the #1 swordswoman of the village. Annoyed, he asks Errol if he agrees with that, and Errol replies without hesitation that his mother is, in fact, the most powerful person in the village. The redhead smirks, reminding him that children inherit the strength of their parents, and that's why he's going to beat the brat down and prove his family is far superior. Besides, he's been a swordsman for over a year and already mastered intermediate techniques. Surely, he'll wipe the floor with this kid, and since Errol has shown from the start that he's not the type to back away from a fight, the two clash right then and there. This duel is clearly a step above the last, impressing not only the previous rivals but also the redhead himself, who admits the match is more balanced than he expected. Still, he has a trump card up his sleeve. Meanwhile, Errol notices that his opponent's anger is making him sloppy. That recklessness could be a weakness. He takes advantage, deflecting a strike. He crouches low and goes in for a piercing counter with the enemy's guard wide open, but the redhead reacts instantly, unleashing his twin blade slash. Errol blocks the first strike, but the second slams into his divine protection. Clutching his wound, the boy can't understand how his rival managed to land 2 strikes at once. The redhead seizes the moment, sneering that a classless like Errol could never hope to defend against such a technique. Still, he admits the kid's got guts for even accepting the duel. Days later, Errol is jolted awake by the most annoying alarm clock on the face of the earth, his little sister. Half asleep, he jumps up and accidentally headbutts her, which ends up being a kind of accidental revenge. At breakfast, she begs her big brother not to push himself so hard in training, because one day, she'll create a world where he can live in peace. Hearing that, Errol can't help but laugh warmly before heading out. After he leaves, she worries aloud he's been staying out late every day, coming home beaten and bruised from his relentless training. To calm her, Farah takes the girl to a chest full of broken swords, every one of them snapped during Errol's practice. In other words, the boy knows how to handle himself. Still, even reassured, his little sister promises to make the world a better place for him. Meanwhile, Errol dives into his daily training and shows he's mastered the twin blade slash. Turns out, he let himself take a beating just so he could study and learn the move. Right on cue, a goblin jumps out from the bushes to ambush him. Errol ends it swiftly using that very technique. But then, a deep, chilling roar echoes from within the forest. It signals something far worse lurking in the trees. Terrified the village might be attacked, Errol rushes toward the guards, but the desperate scream of a child pulls him straight into the woods. There, he finds none other than the redhead lying wounded. Standing before him is a hobgoblin, a monster that never shows up in these lands. Several larger goblins lie dead around the training grounds, proof that the redhead fought them off before. Sizing up the hulking enemy, Errol realizes he needs to focus more on his footing than his wrist. Timing will be everything. With that in mind, he steadies himself, adjusts his stance, and unleashes the twin blade slash at the perfect moment, bringing the beast down. Afterward, he notices the redhead's holy water smashed on the ground. Without hesitation, Errol hands over his own flask, letting him restore his divine protection. The redhead recovers almost instantly, only to demand how a classless like Errol managed to perform the twin blade slash. Calmly, Errol explains that he had to train hard to master such a complex move. He also points out that he studied how the redhead used it again and again during their fight, and it was by enduring those blows that he managed to learn it later. Finally, Errol adds that he still wants a rematch, and this time, the redhead accepts because after all, the boy had just saved his life. Since that's how it was, the two of them wasted no time and clashed right then and there. Right from the start, both unleashed the twin blade strike at the same time. But Errol's power carried one extra slash, so when two cuts from each fighter canceled each other out in the collision, that final strike broke through and landed squarely on target. The redhead scoffed, reminding him that the skill was called twin blades, not triplets. Errol just shrugged and explained that he didn't bother with such limiting details. What mattered, he said, was shaping a technique so it served you better in the heat of battle. The redhead wasn't about to accept a lecture from someone without a class. He raised his sword once more, recalling how he had learned fencing from his father, Captain Evans. Losing wasn't an option, not to anyone, and especially not to a boy who hadn't even been granted a class by the goddess. One way or another, he knew one thing for sure. He'd have to stay sharp against this opponent. And yet, even though he had sworn to watch out for that third slash of the twin blade, he fell for the same attack again and lost the duel. Breathing hard, he asked if Errol had gone easy on him in their last fight, because this time he was clearly much faster than before. Errol shook his head and explained that it was thanks to his rival that he'd been able to see his own limitations and push past the weaknesses that had cost him that first defeat. A few days later, over tea in the evening, Farah mentioned to the family that Evans's son had left for Brescia that very day, a place known as the City of Swords where Farah herself had once been part of the local guild before she married. Hearing that, Errol felt a pull in his chest. He longed to go to a place like that too, but the thought haunted him. How far could someone without a class really go? Even so, one thing was certain: he wanted to find out, and the only way to know was to try. Speaking of Brescia, that's exactly where a group of travelers is arriving by carriage. Since it's the ideal city for anyone who carries a sword, the passengers can hardly hide their excitement. One woman in the group proudly declares herself a dual-blade swordswoman, while a young man beside her boasts that he's a barbarian. The woman invites him to form a party with her, but the man quickly makes it clear he has no patience for people who wear such ridiculous outfits into battle. She calmly explains that her class requires agility, so she has to wear as little as possible in order to move swiftly. One way or another, the argument between them is already heating up. But before things escalate further, the carriage is suddenly surrounded by orcs in an ambush. The driver, trying to keep things under control, politely asks the adventurers to put their skills to use. As if the horde wasn't enough, among them looms an orc king, a massive beast who clearly won't be easy to bring down. The barbarian knows full well it would take a squad to topple that monster, but the swordswoman, clutching her child, begs him to fight. Still, the man refuses, shoving the mother aside, and just like him, the dual-blade swordswoman abandons the carriage and flees. That's when the last passenger, a quiet young man who hasn't said a word until now, steps down from the vehicle and faces the enemy. As he charges forward, his hood falls back and the crowd realizes it's Errol. The others watch in stunned silence. His skill in battle is so extraordinary that it feels more like watching a performance than a fight. His speed, his technique, the way he moves through the orcs, it's less like a warrior fighting and more like an artist dancing through a deadly stage, cutting down enemies with unmatched grace. When he slips free from a ring of dozens of orcs, the driver no longer has any doubt. That counterattack is none other than the legendary Blade Dance, a technique belonging only to the Sword Princess class, even if only women are supposed to possess it. Finally, Errol faces the Orc King. In one blazing charge, he leaps at the beast just as it swings at him and drives his blade straight through the creature's skull. With victory behind him, he turns back to the driver and simply asks that they resume the journey. He wants to reach Brescia as soon as possible to train and become even stronger. The driver, still in awe, remarks that perhaps the young man is already strong enough. Meanwhile, the little boy from the carriage pipes up, asking what class such a powerful warrior belongs to. When Errol answers that he doesn't belong to any class at all, everyone is left speechless. 5 years earlier, Errol was training in the yard with his mother. After he executed a technique, she remarked that it looked just like the twin blade slash. He admitted it was, though she wasn't entirely sure. It was late, and she was too sleepy to tell whether she was awake or dreaming. Even so, she couldn't quite believe that her son, born without a class, could truly pull off such a powerful technique. Calmly, Errol explained that he had mastered it simply by practicing, that this was no dream, and that he intended to learn many more techniques the same way. He asked his mother to teach him a few sword princess abilities, so that once he had mastered them, he could travel to Brescia and discover how to make use of it all. Hearing this, his mother couldn't help but smile proudly, insisting that despite everything, her son was a true prodigy. And then Errol is brought back to the present. The driver announces that they've finally arrived in Brescia. As he enters the City of Swords, the boy is overwhelmed by the sheer number of swordsmen scattered everywhere, not to mention the countless advanced classes among them. He even finds it curious that the driver was able to recognize certain things about sword techniques that someone in his profession normally wouldn't. When asked, the man admits he's actually a holy knight, an advanced class. Fighting every day is exhausting, so sometimes he takes on carriage work just to clear his head. It's a life that Errol himself had never considered, though he admits it does sound like an interesting hobby. In any case, the driver advises him to start by joining a guild, since most swordsmen in Brescia make a living by winning battle tournaments, and you can only enter if you belong to a guild. Errol agrees, explaining that his goal is to face the strongest warriors around. But the Holy Knight warns him to tread carefully. Some guilds in that city are far more ruthless than they appear. After parting ways with the man, Errol wanders the streets and sees 2 armored warriors recruiting people for the cavalry, a noble guild made up of knights. Nearby, 2 women invite anyone with a blade to join the sword road. Even thieves and hunters are welcome. In the middle of it all, a girl sneaks up on Errol, but stumbles and falls when he abruptly changes direction. Though she's never seen him before, she acts as if she's been chasing him for ages, shoving a contract in his face and demanding he sign it to join her guild. Errol brushes her off and starts to walk away, but when she grabs his belt and refuses to let go, he can't help but point out that no one gets that desperate to recruit unless they're part of some rookie guild starving for members. The girl insists her group is actually famous, and what's more, if he joins, he'll even get the chance to go on a date with the beauty standing right in front of him. Errol flatly tells her he has no interest, growing irritated when he realizes she acts exactly like his sister, full of herself, even though she's flat as a board. Setting his annoyance aside, he asks which guild is considered the most powerful in the region. Though clearly offended at being ignored, she admits it's probably the Black Blade, boasting 8 rank a swordsman. Without wasting any time, and following the stranger's instructions, Errol arrives at a grand mansion. He introduces himself to the guard and declares his desire to join the Black Blade. The guard informs him that before anything else, he must take a test at the reception desk. So, Errol makes his way there and finds a line of candidates waiting to participate in the admission exam. Excited, he waits eagerly for his turn. When his moment finally comes, he's asked about his class and bursts of laughter echo from the attendant when he answers that he's classless. After all, this guild only accepts advanced swordsmen. The clerk promptly dismisses him. Errol insists, even asking them to make an exception, confident that he could pass the trial, but the man behind the desk simply shrugs. Rules are rules. Suddenly, an A-rank swordsman strides into the reception hall, stealing the attention of everyone present. The candidates watch in awe at the advanced warrior's presence. Errol, on the other hand, couldn't be further from that recognition. As a classless, he's left with no choice but to try his luck elsewhere. Yet no matter where he goes, he's immediately turned down, never given even the slightest chance to prove his abilities. After a pause to mourn his failure, he recalls the letter of recommendation his mother gave him. She had told him to deliver it to her old guild. They might give him a helping hand. Just then, the same annoying girl from before shows up again. Realizing he still hasn't joined any guild, she renews her invitation for him to join her. This time, seeing that he's determined to refuse her to the bitter end, she actually kneels before him, begging him to accept. She even goes so far as to promise she'd lick his boots if he said yes. But Errol, unfazed, rejects her again and storms off without a second thought. Humiliated, but not defeated, the girl persists in her mission to recruit him. Since they're already near her guild's headquarters, she insists that at the very least he should pay them a visit. Errol is truly impressed by the sheer size of their guild hall, though it makes him wonder why such a place has so few members. Cornered, the girl admits the truth. This group is only a shadow of its former glory. Nowadays, they're among the weakest guilds in the city. Still, she swears their golden days will return. For as long as the King of Two Swords leads them, Dragon Fang will never die. That name makes Errol pause. His mother had once told him her guild was led by none other than the King of Two Swords himself, who had named the clan after one of his techniques, Dragon Fang. Realizing this was his mother's guild, Errol finally decides to join. He's led into a chamber, where the girl asks him to sit. There, slouched in a chair, is her father. She scolds him immediately for drinking again. Errol assumes this must be the King of Two Swords, though the man is missing his right arm, and speaking of him, he doesn't even give Errol a chance. He simply tells the boy to leave, saying the guild is doomed. Saddened by her father's pathetic state, the girl explains that once upon a time he had been one of the two greatest swordsmen in Brescia, but ever since he lost his arm, he drowned himself in reckless drinking. Because of that, she imagines Errol would want nothing to do with their guild. To her shock, though, he declares without hesitation that he'll join them mainly because no other guild will take him. Overjoyed, she brings out the contract once again. He signs it, and when she reads his information class, she assumes it's a joke, but Errol presents an official document proving otherwise. Still, she draws a sword from the wall and warns him to tear up the contract if he wants to live. After all, everyone knows that the bare minimum to join a guild is some basic swordsmanship, and this kid was standing there with such arrogant posture. She hadn't even considered he might really be classless. Their shouting draws another woman into the room. "Lilia, what on earth is going on?" she asks. Lilia runs to her, throws her arms around her, and vents her frustration. She thought she had found a perfect new recruit, but instead she brought home a useless classless. At those words, Riener studies Errol more closely and suddenly recognizes him. They had trained together in the same village as children. Errol racks his brain, he's sure he would remember a woman this beautiful. Unless, ironically, she's the child of Captain Evans, that obnoxious redhead rival of his childhood. Riener clarifies that Evans only had a daughter, and that daughter is her. She doesn't blame him for not recognizing her. After all, her hair has grown a lot since then. Errol smirks and says other things have grown too. If you catch his meaning, Lilia suddenly realizes this must be the very classless boy her friend once admitted she couldn't beat when they were younger. And speaking of which, Riener wastes no time. She challenges him to a rematch. On the training grounds, Riener begins the duel with the same skill she had used 5 years earlier, twin blade slash. Errol can't help but find it ironic, since she knows he can nullify that ability by repeating the same move. Yet when he tries it, her slash overpowers his and lands squarely. Riener declares she's far stronger now than she was back then, and she proves it by driving a sword into the ground, 5 times heavier than any normal blade. Thanks to the brutal strength skill she wields as a mighty swordswoman, she's capable of crushing her opponent. With that, she charges forward and unleashes a flurry of heavy blows. Errol struggles to block them all. He realizes she's reached one of the advanced swordsman classes, and he knows he'll be defeated if he keeps letting himself take those hits. So, he pulls back to create distance. In his mind, if this is the speed she's working with, then he doesn't need to worry too much about being struck. Offended by the provocation, Riener charged at her target, dropped her guard, and landed a sword strike on him. However, that was only an illusion of her rival, who appeared behind the mighty swordswoman and slashed at her. Riener couldn't understand how that man had been able to use the shadow technique, a supreme ability that was difficult even for more advanced swordsmen. Taking advantage of his exceptional speed, he managed to strike his opponent once again. But because of her class, even when hit, she didn't lose her divine protection. Considering she possessed the courage skill, his attacks weren't strong enough to cause any real damage. In this situation, Errol resorted to the ability Counterattack, a sword princess technique he had learned from his mother. Using this move, he managed to block one of Riener's strikes and win the duel. Ashamed of losing once again after insisting so much on a rematch, Riener was even more humiliated when she ran out of the training grounds, crying loudly. Finally, after his demonstration of strength, Errol was accepted into the group by Lilia, who decided to pretend she had believed in him from the very start. Now that he was in, the boy asked why the guild was in such terrible shape, and the girl whispered in his ear just how much money they owed to some strange folks. Even so, she promised they would turn things around soon, because a battle competition was about to begin, and they would take part in it to earn the money they needed. The reason Lilia had been so desperate to recruit a new member was that each guild needed at least 3 participants to enter the tournament. Assuming Rionur would be one of the participants, Errol couldn't understand why such a talented swordswoman was stuck at this guild hall doing nothing. That's when Lilia explained that, back when she was a child and couldn't get accepted into any guild in the city, her father had extended his hand to the young woman. Since then, she felt indebted to the guild and stayed with them out of sheer loyalty, since no one else had accepted her. Aside from that, although she recognized her companion's strength, Lilia didn't seem very confident about winning the tournament, since the 3 of them would have to face a group of 5 opponents. Even so, Errol showed remarkable confidence and declared that this would be a great chance for him to refine his techniques after all. That was the very reason he had come to Brescia. Watching through the crack of the door, Lilia's father had been listening to the entire conversation until he decided to walk away after hearing the new Dragon Fang member's final words. When he wakes up the next day, Errol takes a few seconds to remember that he joined his mother's guild. After getting ready and going down to the hall, where he meets 2 of his teammates, he comments that it's been a long time since he last slept in a real bed, so he slept like an angel last night. He glances at Rionur and figures she's still in a bad mood because she lost to him. Once everyone is gathered, Lilia has an important announcement to make. Now that the guild has reached the minimum number of members required to enter the championship, they will sign up for the competition this weekend. If they win, they'll earn the money they need to get the guild back on its feet. The competition is a knockout format, where one participant faces another in a one-on-one match, and the guild that runs out of fighters loses. The limit is 5 fighters per team, and the minimum is 3. In other words, everyone in that room are the Dragon's Fang adventurers who will take part. Rionur thinks it's going to be very difficult, but Lilia assures her it won't be as hard as it sounds, because they have 2 B-rank swordsmen on the team. While it's rare to find an opponent of a rank, Errol asks what this rank thing is about, and Rionur, a bit annoyed that he doesn't even know that, explains that the rank represents a swordsman's individual strength. Lilia adds that there are 4 ranks, from D to A, and that out of 500 swordsmen in Brescia, only about 20 are at the top rank. She says both she and Rionur are B rank, and since Errol defeated Rionur, he probably is too. If they don't face any A ranks in the tournament, they can definitely take the title. The matchups will be announced at the Coliseum soon, so Lilia decides to go there now to see who they'll be facing. After the girl leaves, Rionur goes out to train, and Errol calls her by her name in a casual way, which irritates her. Ignoring her annoyance, he asks what other abilities she has besides brute strength. Reluctantly, the woman reveals that she possesses courage, which reduces divine protection consumption. Wanting to learn that technique, Errol stands up, grabs the girl's hand, and asks her to beat him up with her sword. Rionur refuses, but the guy insists that this is their chance to get closer. Imagining the situation, the swordswoman doesn't understand how that could bring them closer. So, realizing he didn't explain it properly, Errol tells her he needs to take hits in order to recreate the state of courage, that is, the ability to endure more damage, since the way to train it is by taking blows without using divine protection. Rionur takes offense, saying that abilities are blessings from the goddess and can't be learned or bought. But Errol reminds her that she herself saw him using the twin blade slash that she possesses. Because of that, he ends up convincing her, and the 2 go to the training room. Rionur offers her sword but doubts Errol will really be able to wield it, since the weapon weighs 5 times more than a normal one, and he doesn't have brute strength. Even so, Errol easily draws the sword and says it's not just about brute force. For example, he developed twin blade slash and the shadow technique through daily training. And the fact that he's lifting such a heavy sword should be proof that perseverance beats talent. If effort means nothing, Rionur admits with frustration that she's just an ordinary swordswoman. Either way, she agrees to train him, as long as he doesn't cry during it because she won't go easy. Errol replies that he feels great having such a strong woman in the same group, so the girl hits him with the sheath. Meanwhile, Lilia arrives back at the guild headquarters, running like crazy. When she finds her friends, she delivers the bad news she just found out at the Coliseum. They'll be facing the most powerful guild in the city, Black Blade, which has no less than 8 A-rank swordsmen, and their leader, Jorg, is as devious as a snake. Even so, Lilia doesn't want to back down now. So all that's left is for them to train like mad until the day of the competition. Then, looking at her teammates, she almost loses it when she realizes that Ryunur probably left Errol with a permanent injury just days before the tournament. A few days later, injured or not, Errol goes to the competition. It's the big day. In front of the Coliseum, the trio hears two townsmen talking about the match between Dragon's Fang and Black Blade. Since Dragon's Fang hasn't fought in a long time, everyone's betting on their rivals. Lilia gets furious and tries to go after them, but Ryunur holds her back. Errol didn't know you could bet on this kind of competition, and Lilia grumbles that their odds are 20 to 1 now. In other words, nobody believes in them, but if they win, they'll win a fortune. Confident in victory, the girl basically bet everything on them, even mortgaging the house and borrowing money to do it. If they win, Dragon's Fang will become extremely rich and never again be called a failed guild. Ryunur points out that things will get even worse if they lose, but Lilia is so obsessed that she promises to go on a wild quest for glory on the battlefield to restore the guild's former fame. Hearing their conversation, a man laughs, amused by the way the girl defends her father's guild. Lilia frowns when she realizes it's Jorg himself, the leader of Black Blade. Jorg comments that the rivals even recruited a classless guy to their team, and, ironically, says he's not there to mock them but to support them, since it's sad to see his old rival doing so poorly. In fact, he says, that's why he arranged this match between their two guilds. It'll be a great chance for Lilia and her dear Dragon's Fang to make a lot of money by winning the fight. All she has to do is defeat the several rank swordsmen waiting on the other side of the ring. The leader of the Black Blade lets out a laugh as he says that, but his opponent insists that she's going to win. In the end, the man mockingly praises the girl's bravery and warns that he'll see for himself how much courage she really has once the fight begins. Either way, the long-awaited moment finally arrives for the entire population of Brescia, who had been eager to see the city's currently strongest guild face off against another that, although no longer the same as before, was once responsible for countless victories in the past. Errol checks the duelist bracket and doesn't see the rival leader's name on the list, so he assumes they're giving him an easy time. However, Lilia gets nervous and reminds him that absolutely all of them are Ranka, not just Jorg. Errol, meanwhile, remains calm and sees this tournament as a chance to learn new abilities. Lilia grows even angrier since the guild's future depends on this stupid tournament, and Errol mutters that she's the one who bet everything they had on this mess. In the meantime, the first duelist of the afternoon is called Gio, the fencer from the Black Blade, against Errol, the classless. The crowd falls completely silent the moment a classless is announced in the ring, until a general murmur begins questioning how this guy could have the nerve to accept a challenge of this level. Gio, arrogant as ever, grumbles that he shouldn't have to face someone so weak, being rank A, and that he'd rather 1,000 times be having fun with the girls from the rival group. Still, he's not the one who chooses the duels. So when the match begins, the fencer uses blink of an eye and extremely fast lunge to strike and pierce his sword through his opponent's torso. However, Errol had only placed a shadow of himself as bait, and now that Gio looks around, there are more shadows spread across the battlefield. Even so, the member of the Black Blade is sure he can finish them all at once, but he didn't expect his opponent to be able to summon 4 shadows at the same time, which overwhelms him. With a clever attack from the enemy's blind spot, Errol manages to approach in the middle of the confusion and hit Gio squarely with a thrust. In disbelief, Gio slowly falls to the ground, while Errol calmly points out that 4 shadows at once isn't much, since his mother can summon 5 when she's not even trying. When the announcer declares the classless as the winner, the crowd goes wild, while Ryunur can hardly believe that this boy managed to defeat a swordsman so easily. As for Errol, after managing to imitate his opponent's thrust, he tells himself he needs to practice that technique better, and Jorg, after seeing with his own eyes what the opponent is capable of, loses that mocking look on his face. In his next duel, after being attacked fiercely and managing to gain some distance from his opponent, Errol launches the twin blade slash and defeats another rank A. Then, facing an extremely fast fighter who uses kicks as a surprise element, Errol relies on his shadows to stay untouched and fool his opponent, once again winning the match with a quick attack from behind. After that, Ryunur doesn't even know what to say about what she's seeing. Lilia, on the other hand, gets excited at the possibility that Errol might beat everyone, since she personally wouldn't stand a chance against those guys. Next, Errol faces his 4th opponent, who, besides having a huge shield that keeps him well protected, has an extremely high natural defense, making his divine protection resemble an almost impenetrable armor. Even so, the Dragon Fang fighter stays focused on the battle, because since he can't break through that divine protection all at once, he'll have to hit the man repeatedly to wear it down little by little. Nervous for not being able to hit Errol, the shield bearer accuses him of not being classless at all, and when Errol explains that one can achieve miracles with training, he refuses to believe it, insisting that it's impossible to surpass someone who has a class when you don't have any. To prove his point, the tank fakes a sword strike and spins to attack with his shield. Errol then uses his prediction technique, the hardest of all the abilities his mother taught him to master, by reading his rival's movement and kicking the shield. Errol disarms the opponent and now has a clear path to victory. By the way, in response to the man's doubt, Errol confirms that he actually learned how to deliver that kick in the previous fight, then gives another free demonstration by slamming his shin into the big guy's stomach. In disbelief, the man keeps insisting it's impossible to learn such complex techniques so quickly, and Errol fully agrees. Truly learning to use them as abilities takes time, but when it's just about copying a move, it's possible to do it immediately, to some extent. Speaking of which, Errol picks up the rival's shield from the ground and, combining the blink of an eye charge with this new weapon, delivers a powerful shield blow that defeats his target and ends the fight, with yet another duel ending without the Dragon Fang member even being touched. The audience starts accusing Errol of lying about being classless. In response to the accusations, the committee organizing the championship decides to reveal the competitor's class record for everyone to see, using a crystal orb that identifies the class contained in the participant's record. The organization proves to the public that Errol truly doesn't belong to any class. As a result, the crowd falls in love with the boy who was supposed to be the weakest but who has instead shown himself to be unbeatable in the competition. On that note, Lilia complains that Rionur didn't tell her earlier how overpowered that guy is. Otherwise, she would have pawned all her father's secret weapons and added them to the bet. By the way, the clever girl then decides she's going to marry him, since he'll be the one to restore her father's guild's honor. However, despite the girl's excitement, the competition was not over yet. The last challenger of the afternoon was called to the ring, Master Swordsman Masamune. Errol was impressed by his opponent's rare sword, which had a long, curved blade. He asked if it was a katana, and Masamune confirmed. Rionur wondered if this man was an Eastern samurai, a highly advanced class. When the fight began, even though the samurai hadn't even touched his sword, Errol could feel an overwhelming intensity coming from him that made him realize that approaching this guy recklessly could mean his end. For some reason, since the opponent hadn't taken a single step, Masamune decided to reveal his strategy to lure Errol in and finish the duel with the death strike. Hearing that, Errol took a few steps forward. He didn't want to stay stuck in that standoff, and besides, he was eager to learn the samurai's deadly move. The Black Blade said it was impossible, since the moment he used the strike, Errol would already be lying on the ground. Even so, the classless boy trusted his speed and kept moving forward, while his opponent still hadn't drawn his sword. That made Errol wonder if the death strike came straight from the sheath. This stalemate caused great hesitation in the boy, who didn't know whether to use his shadows after all. The target was extremely focused, and there was a risk he'd recognize the real Errol. Even so, the Dragon Fang kept advancing, and when he reached a proper distance, Masamune answered with an EI slash. But to his surprise, Errol managed to move faster than the sword and avoided the attack. Although Masamune was the fastest swordsman he had ever seen in this city, the classless one had been trained by someone even faster. With that, he counterattacked with the storm thrust, a furious sequence of piercing strikes that hit the samurai's back, thus ending the duel and the tournament. Lilia was amazed as she witnessed the most lethal move of the Sword Princess class. While the announcer declared the victory of the Dragon Fang Guild, the audience went crazy after all. Everyone had bet on the Black Blade, while Lilia and Rionur, on the other hand, hugged each other when they realized they were now rich. After Errol left the ring, Lilia tried to give her friend a big hug, but out of habit, he dodged with his usual speed, making the girl crash onto the floor. Beside her, Rionur had also been ready to hug him, but quickly pretended that wasn't the case. Noticing her melons, Errol jokingly suggested that she should take off her armor if she really wanted to hug someone. Lilia, in turn, made it clear that she wouldn't mind taking everything off. But when she tried to hug the guy again, she ended up on the floor once more. Meanwhile, watching Errol from afar, Jorg promised he wouldn't let this slide. The winning clan, which had nothing to do with that mess, goes back home to celebrate their victory with a small banquet filled with drinks, as if asking for something trivial. Lilia starts nagging Errol to marry her, since, according to her, she's an older woman ready to satisfy the young man's desires. Out of patience with that chatter, Errol replies that he'd rather marry someone like Rhaenyra. Offended and embarrassed, Rhaenyra tells him to come up with a better lie if he's just trying to mess with Lilia. Then Errol asks why she thinks he's lying. She answers that it's because everyone has always said she looks more like a man, since she's always training with her sword all the time. Besides, she feels she doesn't have any truly feminine charms. Looking at his comrade's heaving chest, Errol disagrees. Be that as it may, the warrior says her mission is to become the best swordswoman possible, meaning she has no time to act like a lady. Seeing that her friend doesn't know how to use the best weapon in her arsenal, Lilia realizes she has no competition. She then strokes Errol's thigh and asks to give him a nice, relaxing massage. Immediately, Rhaenyra becomes even more embarrassed and yells that such a thing is utterly indecent. But mocking as always, Errol says he'd rather have a massage from Rhaenyra. Later, during training, the man from the clan forgets the massage talk and goes through his daily self-inflicted torture to learn the skills he wants. When someone asks if he isn't going crazy from taking so many hits, Errol explains that only by being pushed to the brink of death will he be able to master the technique of courage, and he wouldn't be able to achieve that without the help of a capable and trustworthy comrade. On the other hand, someone in the clan doesn't really understand the reason for this training. Fed up with that senseless beating, especially after a few drinks, Lilia's father shows up to ask if the boy is training like that to vent his frustration for losing the tournament. His daughter says they beat the Black Blade, but not believing her, the father assumes they must have sent only rookies to that competition. When the girl tells him all their opponents were rank A and that Errol defeated them, the man looks at the classless boy and wonders if he's really that strong. Anyway, when Lilia says she earned a fortune by betting on the tournament and will be able to rebuild the clan, he doesn't believe it at all and acts as if she should just give up. After all, if Errol is as strong as she says, soon he'll be recruited by a stronger guild. Leaving Dragon Fang behind again, Lilia promises that won't happen, since she's going to marry Errol. The boy, of course, denies it again, but even though he admits Lilia is an idiot, he also says she's much better than the losers who just give up and do nothing. Then he asks when her father will stop whining and start acting his age, since he still has one arm left. Hearing that, Lilia's father gets furious, grabs the boy by the collar with his remaining arm, and says that a dual swordsman who can't hold two swords is left with nothing but a handful of useless skills. Ironically, Errol replies that he understands the man, since he himself is classless and has no skills at all. When the man lets go of him and leaves, Errol admits that the guy is actually quite strong despite everything, and that it's a waste he's still not fighting. Lilia thanks Errol for the way he spoke to her father, saying that situation should give him a shake. Rhaenyra comments that Rod is a great person who just needs to rediscover his passion, and soon he'll be back in action. Errol thinks he could learn a few things from a dual swordsman, but since her father isn't in shape yet, Lilia suggests they go to a dungeon. When Errol says he doesn't know what that is, the girls explain that there's a huge dungeon underground in this city, a place full of traps and monsters. Errol gets excited right away, while Rhaenyra says she'd love to get more experience to compete in the God Sword Cup, the biggest tournament in the city, which determines who the supreme swordsman is. Thinking Errol wants to take part, Lilia gives him a registration form, but he realizes it's actually a marriage certificate, tears it up, and then puts Lilia in a chokehold in revenge. Meanwhile, Jorg had ordered a subordinate to magically spy on Dragon Fang, so he finds out they're going to the dungeon the next day. He prepares an ambush and plans to make it look like just another dungeon accident. The next morning, Lilia goes to Errol's bed in her pajamas to give him a good morning kiss, but the boy wakes up and holds her head away to keep her back. Furious, the woman demands to know how he can reject a beautiful maiden like her, who's been practicing throwing herself at his feet. Out of patience, the man ties her to the bed and leaves her talking to herself. Then he knocks on Rhaenyra's door, and when he's allowed in, he's about to ask her for something until he notices she's still asleep, talking as if she were speaking to her father, proudly saying she's a power swordswoman like him. Errol laughs at how much of a daddy's girl she is, while Rod shows up at the boy's room because of all the noise and starts arguing with his daughter, who's tied to another man's bed wearing only her sleepwear. Later, the trio arrives at the entrance to the city's dungeon. Errol thought the place would look more like a dark cave, but there are tons of people there. Ryunur explains it's because the God Sword Cup is coming up, and everyone wants to be ready. Soon, the group arrives at a teleportation device that can take a person to any floor of the labyrinth they want, as long as they have already been there before. Lilia, for example, could only go down to the 12th floor, while Ryunur could go straight to the 14th. Errol cannot use the teleport, since he has not been physically in any level of the dungeon. Therefore, Lilia offers to take him through the shortcuts until they reach the more difficult floors, while Ryunur goes on her own and waits for them to arrive. That said, Lilia drags the man into the dungeon, but he makes it clear that he would rather go with Ryunur. In the end, the three of them end up entering together, and right at the entrance, they come across two monsters known as living armors. Right from the start, Errol is almost surprised by the speed of the creatures, since they wear heavy armor. However, the human believes that they are no match for him, so he decapitates the enemy and imagines he has won the duel. Nevertheless, the living armor returns to combat even without a head. Ryunur explains that these things are moved by the magical energy of the cave and do not feel pain, so the classless man cuts the enemy's legs and immobilizes it. When Ryunur defeats the second one, the boy notices that the living armors have stopped moving, so his companion explains that soon they will regenerate and fight again. Errol states that this is perfect for training. Lilia points out that the fight was way too easy, and the boy is forced to note that she did absolutely nothing. While the girl justifies herself saying that her partners were too quick on the trigger, the boy wants to know which class she belongs to. Full of pride, she declares herself a fencer and offers to teach any technique her companion wants to learn. However, since fencer is the class below sword princess, the boy replies that Lilia is useless to him. Shaken by her comrade's cruel comment, Lilia insists that maybe she can at least teach the man to have compassion. Suddenly, the Dragon Fang trio hears cries for help in the cave and sees a young swordsman seriously injured. He explains that he entered a new room for the first time and was caught by a terrible trap, and although he managed to escape, his friends were trapped inside. Ryunur immediately offers to rescue them, but Lilia would love to negotiate a reward first, which Errol finds ironic, since this girl wanted to teach him about compassion just 2 minutes earlier. In the middle of that, the wounded man recognizes Lilia as a famous girl he has seen on some magazine covers, and that flatters the maiden, who makes a point of saying that she once posed for Sword Maiden beauties. The boy mentions the article he read about the rich girl from the failed guild, but that ends up enraging the girl. Seeing that he will not win Lilia over with flattery, the man gives her a bag of money, and then the woman finally agrees to go after his companions. Errol goes with them, of course, but something about that guy makes him suspicious, especially the way the man is bleeding. When Errol lost that much blood, he could barely move without a lot of holy water nearby, so he assumes that this swordsman's wounds are fake. Anyway, the classless man prefers to stay quiet, as he is sure this will be fun. Further ahead, they reach the entrance to the hidden room. The supposedly wounded boy presses a few bricks on the wall, which triggers a secret opening that gives access to the place. However, the man's friends are not inside, which puts Errol on alert. On the other hand, Lilia sees a gold coin next to a pool of blood and runs to grab it, which ends up activating a teleport trap. The swindler mocks that Lilia is as petty as the rumors say, then closes the entrance and apologizes for what he is about to do. After all, it is just his job. However, to his surprise, the trap spreads until it reaches him, teleporting all four of them somewhere else. When they realize it, the Dragon Fang trio is in a place never seen before, and Ryunur assumes it is a floor even lower than the 14th. Lilia, in turn, is worried about going after the man who set them up. But as she stands up, she ends up kicking the gold coin, which rolls to the center of the room and starts emitting an intense light. Summoning a monster with a threatening appearance, the swordsman who tricked the trio explains that the idea was to throw them alone onto this last floor, where sword gods are lurking. Without delay, the creature fires a beam of energy through a sword strike, and that power almost destroys the entire wall of the room. The girls ask what the hell that is, and Errol explains that it is the Divine Air Slash, a long-range sword god technique. Speaking of range, the enemy crosses the distance to Errol in just 1 second, as if it could teleport. The human blocks the strike, but is thrown against the wall by the immense pressure imposed by the armored opponent. The girls worry that this is the end, but the truth is that, in the end, it was worth it that Errol insisted so much on learning courage, since the blow barely affected his divine protection. When the boy manages to push the opponent away and strike back with a sword swing, the monster escapes using divine step. a superior version of Lightning Rush. In other words, this knight is undoubtedly from a very advanced sword god class, which is a great chance for Errol to test his abilities. The girls and the swindler look at the boy in disbelief, while Errol quickly charges forward, replicating Divine Step and starting a sequence of fast attacks. The knight responds with a skill that throws everyone to the ground with the weight of gravity, except for Errol, who remains standing. The classless man remembers when one day he was trained by his mother precisely against that kind of technique. At the time, she was surprised that he managed to stay on his feet. According to the woman, after freezing the opponent with Divine Presence, you must strike them with Infinite Break, that high-speed slashing attack. Knowing he was the one who would serve as a punching bag, the son asked his mother to control the strength of her ability, something she doesn't know how to do. After promising she would try, the sword princess attacked with overwhelming power. Thinking about it now, the man thanks his mother for having taught him in the most rigorous way possible, because today Errol is able to move under the pressure of Divine Presence. Without delay, the human picks up the gold coin from the floor and cuts it in half, then attacks with Infinite Break, but before reaching his opponent, he destroys himself. While the winner drinks holy water to recover, the girls ask how he can use that sword god ability, since they have never seen anyone from that class in their entire lives. Errol then reveals that his mother was actually a goddess of the sword and was only pretending to be a princess of the sword because she hates attracting attention. With that said, another teleportation spell appears in the room, allowing the swordsman to leave. Lilia even calls the guy who had tricked them to go as well. He thought he would be punished for what he did, but since Errol seems satisfied with the fight he had, the girl decides to let it slide. Meanwhile, in a tavern, Rod reflects on Errol's words back in the training room when he said the man still had one arm left. Suddenly, he hears the loud conversation of the group of the boy who had tricked Dragon Fang in the dungeon. They were boasting about having made easy money from some fools, and when it came to their partner Deal, who had almost died on that mission, they just laughed since they had expanded the range of the teleport trap on purpose to throw him in and keep a larger share of the profit. Then, when one of the bandits mocks the ridiculous end of the Dragon Fang Guild, Rod stands up from his chair and asks to hear a bit more of that interesting story. He is quickly recognized as the founder of Dragon Fang. He throws a punch that smashes the boy's table and demands to know what those frauds did to his daughter. In the middle of that, Jorg arrives, accusing Rod of always being loud and troublesome. Knowing what kind of man he is, Rod accuses him of having plotted all this. But the leader of Black Blade explains that he only came to deliver some news about a colleague. Unfortunately, his guildmates saw Rod's daughter entering a hidden chamber of the dungeon along with her friends. Enraged, Rod asks if it wasn't enough for that bastard to have taken his arm, since now he also wants to take his daughter. Inconsolable, he tries to grab his rival, but ends up falling to the floor in humiliation. However, to his surprise, the ones entering the tavern at that very moment are none other than Lilia and her companions, who look perfectly fine. Receiving a tight hug from her father, Lilia tells Jorg that they almost died because of him, but they managed to defeat the sword god and make it out alive. Jorg gives himself away by saying it's impossible for those kids to have defeated an enemy of that level. Even so, the brat who had tricked the trio ends up confessing that the leader of Black Blade was the one behind the scheme. Regardless, Jorg insists he won't be punished after all. The law says everyone is responsible for their own safety inside the dungeon. On the other hand, as he walks away from his enemies, he destroys everything around him out of anger for not having killed those brats. The sword princess has vanished, and he defeated the king of two swords, which practically put the crown of strongest guild on his head. But now, he has to compete with some classless guy capable of going head to head with a mere sword god, meaning he'll once again live in the shadow of other prodigies. Feeling the human's wrath, a dark sword resting in the room decides to grant Jorg a wish. Sometime later, while watching the preliminaries of the God Sword Cup, Lilia grumbles that she'll be left out of the main event for yet another year. After all, she ended up in the same bracket as Errol, and there's no way she's not getting crushed. Errol shows up, surprised there are even preliminaries in this tournament, and Rioner explains that too many people signed up, so the main event is reserved for the winners of each qualifying block. Hearing that, Errol tells his friend not to be too upset after all. Just making it this far is already an achievement for someone at her level. Lilia doesn't find that very comforting, though. Rioner, on the other hand, is in the opposite bracket, but she still notices some strong opponents she'll have to face. Even so, she's confident she'll get through the first round and make her father proud. Feeling the mood, Lilia decides to stop chickening out and promises not to throw in the towel. That's why the three of them head to a dungeon to train that very same day. When Errol asks if he really has to go, she replies yes, someone has to be there to save the day in case things go sideways. Hearing that last part, Rod walks up to them and warns everyone to be careful inside the dungeon, especially since no one knows when Jorg might set another trap for Dragonfang. Looking at her father's missing arm, a wound caused by Jorg, his daughter nods, promising to stay alert. Rod then turns to Errol, admitting the boy might think it's a little late for him to play the protective father, but he's determined to quit drinking and get his life back on track. Days pass, and soon the great moment arrives, the preliminaries of the God's Sword Cup. Once again, the arena in Brescia is packed with townspeople eager to watch the most anticipated event of the year. But despite all the excitement and high hopes, Errol finds Lilia sitting alone, upset after losing and being knocked out of the competition. He feels bad for her, he'd really wanted to face her later on, but she scoffs, saying she's not buying any of his consolation talk. Still, she points out that the next match is the final round, and since Errol is still standing, he'd better keep his guard up at all times. His opponent has some very unique abilities and deserves his full attention. Errol insists he's seen it all in the dungeon, but Lilia reminds him that everything he's faced so far were just swordsman techniques. His new opponent's moves, on the other hand, come from her class, a magic swordsman, who can enchant her own blade with spells. Errol finds it strange that they'd let a mage enter a sword fighting competition, but Lilia explains that the class doesn't matter, the only requirement is being registered with a guild. Fair enough, he admits. He's got no class at all, and he's still in the tournament. Just then, the announcer calls the next contestants to the arena. Errol meets his opponent, the magic swordsman herself. Before the fight even starts, she makes it clear that her class is perfectly legitimate and fair. So she doesn't want to hear any excuses like, "It's easy when you use magic," if he loses. Errol laughs it off, saying it's fine, may the best one win. The battle begins. The woman immediately launches several fireballs, forcing Errol to dodge with difficulty and even use his sword to deflect the ones he can't avoid. Still, he manages to get through her barrage and counter with a lunge, but she blocks with her sword in her right hand while casting more spells with her left, keeping him constantly on the defensive. Confident, the magic swordsman declares she can't be defeated. Errol replies that she may have a wide range of skills, but she's not a master of any of them. Offended by his arrogance, the woman enchants her sword with fire to teach him a lesson. Using a massive whip of flames, she lashes out across the entire arena, her wild, unpredictable movements making it harder and harder to read her attacks. Even so, after observing her rhythm and finding his openings, Errol defends more efficiently and calmly notes that her swordsmanship is, at best, about the same level as Lilia's. Enraged by the insult, she swings harder, but Errol responds with twin blade slash, unleashing a gust of wind strong enough to snuff out the fire coating her sword. Then, with lightning rush, he closes the distance in a flash and knocks her out cold with a blow to the neck. Thanking her for showing him another interesting technique, Errol sheathes his sword as the announcer proclaims him the winner of the fourth bracket. Maybe, he thinks, with the right kind of training, he could even learn to use magic someday. A few days later, Lilia tries to wake her father up to go watch Errol in the main event, but the man refuses to get out of bed. She reminds him that guilds with members in the final rounds get the best seats in the stands, but when that doesn't work, she teases him, asking if he's scared of Jorg. That does the trick. Rod bolts upright, shouting for her to shut her mouth. He mentions he picked up his sword yesterday and realized it's so rusty he'd have trouble winning the God's Sword Cup himself. Annoyed by his fake humility, Lilia snaps back, asking if he even knows how it feels for people who can't even qualify for the main event. And no matter what he says, she's not taking no for an answer, even if she has to drag him there tied up. He's going to that tournament. On their way to the arena, Lilia admits that, even though her father pretends not to care about the cup, he still sneaks in sometimes to watch the matches. She recalls one day, while training with Rionur, Rod disarmed his student during a spar and told her that, even though she still had a long way to go, she was improving every day and should keep pushing forward. In other words, her master loves seeing his pupils rise through the ranks. There's no way he'd miss seeing Rionur compete in the most important championship in town. Smiling, Rod replies that his daughter is just like her mother. Meanwhile, while waiting for her turn to fight, Ryunur looks a little tense, so much that Errol notices it and goes to see how she's doing. She admits she's nervous. After all, this tournament is very important for any swordsman. Besides, in the main event, you can't know who you'll face until the time comes, which makes her even more anxious, since it's impossible to plan a strategy. Errol jokes that the girl is just afraid of facing him in the next round. So Ryunur tries to punch him in the face, which he easily blocks. In the middle of that, the next competitors to enter the arena are announced. Last year's champion, the Sword Emperor, Jorg against the classless one, Errol. When she sees her partner stand up to go, Ryunur impulsively grabs his hand and wishes him luck. When the boy steps into the arena, Lilia appears close to him in the stands and tells him to kick that miserable snake's ass. Speaking of snake, when Errol looks at his opponent's appearance, he sees that Jorg is in a beast-like transformation, almost feral, with a horn on his forehead. Noticing the sword the enemy is holding, Rod tells Errol to stay far away from him, because he's holding the worst weapon imaginable. Lilia asks what he means, and her father explains that this sword contains a powerful demon sealed inside it. Surprised that someone recognized the weapon, Jorg asks if Rod belongs to the Imperial Court, and Lilia is confused because that man doesn't seem to recognize her father. To Rod, that makes it clear that Jorg has been possessed by the demon, since, according to legend, the weapon that the god of the blade used to defeat the demon was cursed, and for that very reason, it should be kept under strong guard in the royal repository. With a smile on his face, the demon confirms that he broke the seal that kept him trapped inside the sword. He waited hundreds of years, until everyone who remembered that legend had died, and the story was forgotten. The monster knew that one day someone would seek his power, so all he had to do was be patient and wait to be released. His name is Duagelda, and he is ready to once again bring chaos wherever he goes. Ryunur rushes into the arena when she remembers that Duagelda is a demon once summoned by an evil entity in ancient times. In fact, the crowd in the stands also seems to recall the story, even though everyone thought it was only a myth. When the truth is revealed before their eyes, despair can be seen in each person's gaze, and soon the stands, once full of excited citizens, begin to empty as the terrified crowd flees. The fear coming from humans sounds like music to the demon's ears, but that alone isn't enough to make up for all the boredom he endured through the years. To increase the people's suffering, Duagelda summons a magic circle that expands and, through a dark miasma, forms a magical shield surrounding the arena, preventing anyone from leaving. Thrilled to have trapped the humans inside like rats, the entity can't wait to do whatever he wants with them. Even so, not everyone reacts to his presence with fear. In front of him, for instance, stands a young human who dares to challenge his supreme power. In response, Errol says he brought his sword because he's confident he can defeat the demon. Duagelda doesn't understand what he's talking about, so Errol reminds him that a long time ago the demon was defeated by the god of the blade, therefore, he's not invincible. The enemy admits that's true, but from the memories of the human he once possessed, Duagelda can say that the god of the blade is no longer among the living, which means there is no living being capable of defeating him now. To that, Errol corrects the opponent on 2 points. First, the god of the blade still exists, she's his mother, though he doesn't reveal that. Second, even if he isn't the god of the blade, Errol can defeat Duagelda. The demon laughs at this absurdity, but Errol charges forward to prove him wrong. With incredible speed, he almost hits the enemy, who has to turn quickly to block the strike. A fight between the two begins, and Duagelda is impressed that this kid just used the divine step, a technique that only the god of the blade possesses. Even so, no matter how fierce the human's attacks are, Duagelda reminds himself that he's possessing the body of the Sword Emperor, and it won't be just any attack that can kill him. Confident of victory, the demon leaps toward his opponent and slashes his shoulder. The powerful blow slams Errol into the ground with tremendous force, and the fall brings a smile to the demon's face. However, that smile fades when Errol simply gets back up, completely unharmed, with the cursed sword still stuck in his shoulder. The human explains that training with Ryunur paid off after all. His courage technique has been absorbing incredible amounts of damage. With that said, displaying advanced techniques of a higher class, Errol unleashes Infinite Break, delivering a vast and powerful series of strikes that begin to overload the enemy's defense. Once his guard is broken, Duagelda remembers that this skill was used by the former god of the blade, which makes him believe that this boy is the god himself. Errol denies it and reaffirms that he's just a mere classless one. Then, he strikes with his sword, sending Duagelda violently flying upward and crashing down hard. raising a huge cloud of dust across the arena. As the dust settles, everyone wonders if the monster is really dead. Examining the body up close, Errol figures that, judging by the wounds and the lack of divine protection, Duagelda is probably out of the fight. Facing the young classless one's victory against such a powerful enemy, the crowd goes wild and praises Errol with admiration like never before. However, after so many years trapped inside a sword, Duagelda refuses to lose that easily. But since he really is too weak to fight, he needs to focus on escaping from that brat and waiting in a safe place until he can regain his full strength. His only option to flee is to transfer himself to some human in the arena, someone who has enough physical strength to make a clean escape. Looking around, Duagelda decides that Rod is the right person for that. At the same time, Lilia is overjoyed that everything worked out. Although Rionur isn't as cheerful, since the championship will probably be cancelled because of the arena's destruction. Then, Duagelda's sword shoots toward the members of the Flaming Dragon Fang. Errol saves Rionur, who was in its path, while Rod, as he jumps in front of his daughter to keep her from being struck, ends up being overtaken by the dark power of that cursed weapon, and then takes his own daughter hostage. Upon discovering that the sword is the demon's main body, Errol promises he will defeat Duagelda again. But as the monster reminds him, if the boy attacks, he'll lose his future wife, since her neck is just a hair's breadth away from being cut. Errol argues that he never once decided to marry that girl. But having access to Rod's memories, Duagelda insists the boy is lying, since that girl told her father she was engaged to Errol. Lilia pretends it has nothing to do with her, while Errol decides to kill them both at once and put an end to this nonsense. Seeing that the guy doesn't care in the slightest about the life of that hostage, Duagelda demands an explanation. Then Lilia blurts out that she isn't Errol's fiancée at all, that it's all just a fantasy from her messed up mind. Even so, she begs for her life, but Errol states that the demon can't kill Lilia, even if he wants to. Duagelda finds that ridiculous. However, little by little, he starts losing part of his control over Rod's body, and it becomes clear that the King of Two Swords is fighting against the monster's possession, managing to lift his arm and thus free his daughter. Rionur doesn't understand how that's possible, so Errol observes that, unlike Jorg, Rod's body barely changed when it was possessed, which makes it clear how resistant he is to the invasion. By the way, with great effort, Rod admits that he would have given in to the power of Duagelda's sword if he had been tempted a few days earlier. But lately, everything has changed in his mind. Since after meeting Errol, Rod became convinced that anyone can regain their former glory as long as they work hard for it. Fighting to rid himself of the demon's possession, Rod gathers his strength and throws the sword toward Errol. In turn, the classless one strikes the cursed blade several times with the endless break and shatters it into pieces. Sometime later, at the headquarters of the Dragon Fang Guild, Rod trains his soldiers in a not-so-gentle way. Let's just say that his violence as a master is making the recruits only get beaten up instead of learning anything meaningful. Among them is the boy who once set a trap for the group in the dungeon, the same one who decided to join the guild at their invitation. He is terrified of the leader and hides so he won't be seen and end up taking a free beating. Lilia goes to call him out, since he said he was going to get to work. She admits her father has been a bit strict since returning to duty, but still, she thanks Errol for bringing Rod's hope back. Speaking of which, the man asks where Errol is, and the girl laments that the ungrateful guy left the guild, even though everyone knew the two of them were destined to get married. Rionur, by the way, took the same path some time later and never came back. Speaking of the devil, the coachman driving Errol during a trip asks if he's really heading for the countryside, since he's the champion of the Sword God Cup and it's quite unusual for the winners to leave the big city. Errol reveals that he wants to go home because there's nothing left to see in Brescia. Besides, he wants to find out if he has the skills needed to defeat his mother. Hearing that, the coachman laughs and comments that even the champion of the greatest sword tournament is afraid of his own mother. It seems mothers really are the ones in charge of every family. Meanwhile, in the peaceful village where the boy was born, Farah, the princess of the sword, cuts a beautiful rose in her garden and thinks about making a bouquet of flowers to celebrate her son's return. Suddenly, Errol appears behind her and admits that he had been hiding his presence, so he gets a compliment from the woman, who says she only noticed his approach a few seconds ago. Errol says he won the Sword God Cup, and his mother feels proud that he won the same tournament she once did. That said, she steps toward him with surprising speed and tells him to smell the rose. Impressed, Errol realizes he would have already lost if she had a sword in her hand instead of a flower. He acknowledges that Farah can read his mind perfectly, and she replies that of course she can after all, she's his mother. Anyway, if they fight there, they'll destroy the house. So she suggests that they go to the training field behind the mountains. Once there, Farah admits she's dying to see how strong her son has become. Jokingly, Errol points out that this will be the only time his mother laughs like that. Then the goddess of the sword questions the champion's statement by attacking him at high speed with the divine step. This time, Errol was focused enough and managed to block, since he had just seen his opponent perform that same move back in the garden. Next, the man steps back to gain space, and realizing he must attack aggressively not to lose, he charges forward with everything he has. The opponent is impressed by the way he combines the air slash and the twin blade slash. By the way, the son asks which skill she used, and she replies that she just swung her sword because, according to her, she learned from her son how to fight without relying on techniques. Admiring how amazing his mother is, the boy attacks again, and the fight between the two could be heard from the middle of the village. That's how intense it was. Incidentally, Captain Evans, Rhaenyr's father, hears all that noise and is startled. The forest around the training field is turning into a disaster because of the clash between mother and son. After being surprised that the boy was using the swordsman's air leap, Farah responds with the divine presence, but just as he had done against that powerful enemy in the depths of the dungeon. When he was caught in the magic trap, Errol manages to block the attack with relative ease. Since that's the case, Farah raises the level of the fight. Soon, when the two opponents meet again in the middle of the battlefield, both use the infinite break at the same time, the special ability of the goddess of the sword. At that same moment, Rhaenyr arrives in the village and starts to think she hasn't met anyone yet because of the strange noise she heard along the way. When she knocks on the door and is greeted by a child, she assumes it's Errol's sister, introduces herself, and says she came looking for him. The girl replies that her brother isn't a milkman to be chasing cows, and that certainly wasn't pleasant for Rhaenyr to hear. Jealous, the child says her brother isn't home and makes it clear he's not interested in seeing a cow, almost slamming the door in the woman's face, but Rhaenyr stops it in time. While the little girl yells that she doesn't know how to speak cow language, Farah appears, calling out to Mira not to be rude to their guest. Errol asks what Rhaenyr is doing there, while Mira runs to give her brother a tight hug after he's been away for so long. The girl comments that both of them look pretty beaten up. So they explain that they had a duel one in which Farah was defeated thanks to a small advantage in physical condition that Errol currently has. Rhaenyr finds that incredible either way, considering his mother is the goddess of the sword. Errol admits that's true, but understands that his mother's current strength isn't the same anymore, so it's not like he can feel too proud about it. Farah grumbles that she's still as young as ever and asks her son to introduce the young lady standing before her. So, everyone goes inside for an afternoon snack, and Farah shows great interest in hearing what happened in the City of Swords, although she seems even more curious to know how the couple fell in love. Mira yells that she's not interested in hearing about a cow's life, and Errol says that the two of them used to live together. Rhaenyr hurries to explain that they were from the same guild before the kid has a heart attack at the table, and adds that he came to the village because Errol left so suddenly and without saying goodbye. He explains that he had already learned all the techniques he thought he should, and that it seemed enough to move on. The girl stands there looking awkward after such a cold answer, and Farah asks if the girl walked all that way just because she was worried about Errol. Rhaenyr says no, since she also lives in the village and, to be honest, she really hopes that the goddess of the sword will become her mentor. In the middle of that, Captain Evans runs into the woman's house asking for help with an urgent matter. According to him, mysterious rumbling sounds had been heard in the western mountains a short while ago, and when he went to check the area, he saw countless trees cut and smashed along the way. Farah makes something up and says there's no need to worry, it was just her defeating a monster. Relieved, Evans finally notices his daughter and asks what she's doing in Miss Farah's house. The goddess of the sword says that the girl wants to learn from her how to become a bride. And while Evans bursts into tears of emotion, the young girl hurriedly explains that she was actually hoping for a few fencing lessons. Since that's the case, Farah says it's a good idea to train both things at the same time. And her father loves the idea, because when his wife died, he swore that he would see his daughter grow up and become a woman, but everything he knows how to teach has to do with swords. And if she could also learn how to take care of a home, nothing could make him happier. In that case, Farah pats her chest and takes the responsibility for herself, while poor Rhaenyr realizes that her opinion there doesn't matter at all. After that, Errol goes to the office of the great Leon, the Archmage, who is also his father. When asked, the sorcerer explains that he's developing a spell similar to his finishing move. But aside from that, after hearing Mira shouting, he wants to know if his son brought home some cutie. About that, Errol says that she's more than a cutie, she's beautiful, but that doesn't matter. In fact, Errol seems more interested in saying that he defeated his mother in a duel, and that he would really like his father to teach him how to use magic. Already expecting this moment to come someday, Leon explains that it's impossible, and that the boy should give up. Back in the kitchen, Farah tries to teach Rhaenyra how to cut a cabbage, but it's obvious the girl isn't used to that kind of task at all. She even takes a battle stance before starting, and ends up destroying the whole table with a heavy swing of the cleaver, breaking Mira's mug too and leaving the little girl inconsolable. Staying calm, Farah asks if the young woman didn't cook back at the guild, and when she admits that she always left that to whoever knew how to do it, the goddess of the sword begins to realize she's going to have a hard time teaching this girl how to take care of a house. Rhaenyra insists that she would rather have only fencing lessons, so the teacher explains that those who want to become excellent swordsmen must learn to master their mind, body, and technique. For that, it's necessary to learn a lot from everyday activities. Speaking of which, she admits she's happy it feels like she's gained a new daughter. Speaking of which, Rhaenyra asks if Errol didn't have an older sister, and Mira says that the girl left home after saying she would build a world where someone without a class, like Errol, could live peacefully. Rhaenyra agrees that the classless suffer a lot of prejudice, but she really doesn't think Errol is the kind of guy who needs help to solve any problem at all. In Leon's office, father and son fix a piece of furniture using household tools. Errol asks if Leon couldn't have fixed that easily with magic, and he says that his wife loves it when he smells like sawdust. But since the boy is dying to see magic, the father picks up his daughter's broken mug and uses the reconstruct spell to make it as good as new. Later, while the two are tidying up part of the outside of the house, Leon insists that his son should give up on using magic, since not everyone has magical energy, a special aptitude required to cast spells. Even so, Leon admits that maybe nothing is impossible for a classless who won the goddess of the sword cup. When opening the old chest where they keep the swords Errol broke during his training over the years, the father points out how dedicated the boy has always been, and that he never repaired or threw away those weapons because he wanted to have proof at home of how true that is. Now, truth be told, not having magical energy, for a mage, is the same as wanting to be a swordsman without hands. Errol asks how his father can be so sure that he doesn't have mana, and Leon explains that if he did, the boy would have been declared a spellcaster on the day of the blessing. Even so, Errol is sure he does, because he discovered it when Rhaenyra used to beat him every day at the guild. Leon grows worried about the kind of relationship his son is in, but the boy explains that he asked to get beaten up to develop the courage skill. Anyway, back then, to restore the divine protection he constantly lost, he had to drink holy water like crazy, which made Lilia furious, even though he'd earned so much money from the bets on the championship he won. And since Errol wanted to ruin his body anyway, the girl showed him some old potions from the storage room that she had no idea what they were. But maybe, if he was lucky, they could be holy water too, or at least something similar. Thinking that training with his internal organs poisoned would be a great way to build endurance, the classless boy decided to take his chances and downed the entire potion in one gulp. After drinking it, he felt something recovering inside him, but it wasn't the divine protection. The father guesses it was his son's magic energy and believes that, if that's the case, he'll be able to teach magic to the boy, something he's always wanted to do, since he's always been jealous of Farah teaching swordsmanship to the kid and not being able to do anything similar for him. To put what was said to the test, Leon asks his son to focus on the energy inside his body and try to release it, imagining it sliding out through the palm of his hand. After a few seconds of trying, the Archmage started to worry that his son had been mistaken. But in the end, Errol managed to release a little bit of magic, though the effort he made caused him to fall backward. Leon explains that his son may have won the Sword God Cup, but when it comes to magic, let's just say he's still nothing more than a baby who needs hundreds of times more energy to achieve what he wants. To accomplish such a feat, there's a long road ahead, with intense training. With tears running down his face, Leon confesses that he never wanted his boy to give up, and that the fact he's always so persistent, even when it seems impossible, is what makes his father so proud of the son he has. Later that day, Errol goes to a shop and drops a large amount of gold coins on the counter to buy all the mana potions available. With that stock in hand, the classless boy devoted the following days to the tireless training of his magical abilities, gradually improving his capacity to cast spells. Considering that his magical energy was quite small, the work ahead of him was enormous. But that didn't stop the young man from staying focused on his goal. 6 months later, Errol was able to display as much mana as a regular spellcaster. But to start using spells, he needs to study magical language, which is a system that serves to structure magic itself. If you master this technique, when casting a spell, it will automatically appear in your mind. To develop that technique, Errol needs to build each spell in his head every time. According to Leon, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the boy to study at the Magic City Institute, a place where the Archmage himself studied when he was younger, but where it's necessary to take a test to be admitted. At lunchtime, Mira smiles as she admires her mother's soup, but gets upset when Rhiannon says that, actually, she was the one who cooked it. So she starts finding faults in the food for no reason. Farah points out that Rhiannon has become a great cook and swordswoman, while Leon acknowledges that she's as beautiful as she is hardworking. Farah jokes that she's jealous, and Rhiannon likes the fact that this couple is so close. She likes to think that if her mother were alive, her parents would be like that too. To please his wife, Leon conjures a heart of fire that splits into several birds flying in coordinated circles, and that trick increases Errol's desire to train and become stronger. 3 years later, Rhiannon is still going strong, training intensely at Errol's house and developing other skills, like making a tea that Farah fell in love with. However, in the middle of this relaxed moment between the two, Mira starts crying and says she went to wake her brother up. But there was only a letter left behind saying that he was going to the City of Magic. The mother comforts her daughter, who can't stop crying, pointing out that Errol had indeed mentioned his interest in magic. But this departure seems far too sudden. Rhiannon comments that she once did something similar with her father, and now she understands how sad it is to be abandoned like that. Farah hugs the girl and asks her not to do the same thing as her son, and she promises she won't, especially since she still has a lot to learn there. Farah confesses that her children are a bit more reckless than she would like, and she pretends she doesn't know who they take after. Leon appears right after waking up and has no idea what's going on. Meanwhile, on the way to Alsbel, the City of Magic, the classless one learns from the coachman that it will take approximately 2 more days to reach their destination. By the way, this man comments that the young one is really strange, since 3 years ago he caused quite a stir in the City of Swords and then simply went back home as if nothing had happened. And now he's suddenly heading to Alsbel out of nowhere. Listening to the conversation, accompanied by some friends, a passenger in the carriage comments that Errol seems a bit older than them to be entering the Magic Institute, and that maybe it's already too late. A friend asks Kaido to stop picking on the guy, since he probably failed the entrance exam several times. Kaido says that Kyufa might think she's defending him, but she's actually bullying him even more, so the two start arguing. The last girl asks them to calm down, and the boy tells Colette to shut up. After the situation settles down, Kaido asks what kind of magic Errol is good at, saying he's good at red magic. Thinking about what to answer, Errol remembers a lesson he had with his father about the 6 styles of sorcery, which are divided by colors: red, blue, green, yellow, white, and black. While the magical ability a person can obtain varies for each individual, in Errol's case, there is no such limitation. After recalling that day, the boy says he's not good at any kind of magic, since he's classless. Kaido is left speechless, while Kyufa laughs and says the man is joking, since no classless person would bother going to the Magic Institute. The kid asks if he looks like a clown, but Errol shows his ID and proves he was serious. The 3 kids are left in shock after seeing a classless person for the first time. Kaido wants to know if Errol has a screw loose for wanting to enter the institute, and the poor guy feels like he's had this conversation before. Suddenly, a frightening roar is heard in the middle of the forest. Errol imagines it came from the Troll King and that it was directed straight at them. Scared out of his mind, Kaido tells the driver to hit the gas, but the horses were so startled that they froze completely. Like a Teletubby, Colette screams that it's time to say goodbye, but Kyufa beats her chest and declares that, king or not, a troll is still a troll. Thinking along with her friend, Kaido assumes the king must be slow because he's huge, so the two agree they could exploit that weakness and win the fight if everyone works together. Colette joins her partners, and then the troll appears before the carriage. Colette starts panicking again, but the boy in the group gives her a shove, saying that fighting in fear means fighting already defeated. However, at that same moment, the real Troll King, 4 times bigger than the first, appears and sends the other one flying into the sky. And the trio immediately concludes that they're going to die. Still, trying to stop shaking, Kaido steps off the carriage with his wand, ready to go down shooting. In an impressive display of courage, the boy gathers all his mana at once and launches a fireball at the troll. But it only serves to make the monster even angrier. From that moment, Kaido knows his time has come. But Errol decides to intervene with an explosion and vaporizes the enemy in the blink of an eye. The kids stare in shock at the classless one, since explosion powers are supreme level red magic, the kind only archmages can cast. After ending the fight, Errol heals the horses and gets them moving again. So Kaido decides to apologize for having underestimated him just because he's classless. As if that weren't enough, he asks if he can call Errol Master, since he wants to become a great wizard like him. Errol shows his classless ID again, but the kids start to suspect it's fake and that he's hiding his true identity for some reason. At that moment, Errol regrets not having used only his sword to kill the troll. Hours later, the carriage approaches the Gate of Ozbel, the city of magic, practically a walled island in the middle of a lake. When the travelers say goodbye to the coachman and cross the bridge to the city, Kaido follows Errol like a little puppy, which annoys his friends. After all, if this guy is much more powerful than he says he is, maybe he used a spell to control Kaido's mind. So they should keep an eye on their friend. Hearing that from afar, Errol can't take it anymore and just wants this whole situation to end already. Inside the city, once Errol used an explosion in the forest, Kaido asks if he's going to take the Red Institute's exam. Being honest, the boy didn't even know that the institutes were also divided by colors, just like the magic classes, and the kid explains that the difference between them is so big that they need to be divided. By the way, Kyufa explains that she's going to the Blue Institute, while Colette is going to the green one. Kaido teases them, saying they'd better open their eyes, or they'll end up being sent away and having to go back to the countryside with their tails between their legs. Speaking of that, Errol hopes he won't be stopped from taking the test, like what happened in the City of Swords. Therefore, he decides to go with Kaido to the Red Institute, where both of them fill out a form with their personal information to start the test. Errol hands his paper to the receptionist who, when looking at the candidate's class, asks if he filled out the blanks correctly. The boy gets tense, certain he'll be stopped from taking the exam once again. However, the employee only wanted to confirm the information and assures both boys that they're in the initial phase of the exam. Confused, Errol asks if he's really allowed to take the exam being classless, and the girl confirms that everyone can participate, which surprises the boy. On the way to the first phase, with a smile from ear to ear, Kaido assures that his master will pass the exam easily with all his vast power. As soon as they arrive at the testing field, a candidate is throwing a fireball at a mannequin wearing war armor, and upon hitting it, he's approved in the test. Next, a cocky kid shows up full of arrogance, looking down on the others for having used only simple fireballs. The person in charge of the exam is impressed when reading the boy's form. Realizing that he's already a mage, an advanced class, even though he's so young, Errol asks what's so special about that. Then Kaido explains that those blessed with an advanced class are considered prodigies, and they always have a much smoother path toward success, which makes everyone envious. Thinking about his father, Errol finds it curious that someone with an advanced class could also be just an ordinary man with a peaceful life in the countryside. Finally, the cocky candidate asks if he can destroy the mannequin with his flames. Kaido comments that this kid thinks too highly of himself, and Errol replies that Kaido himself isn't one to talk much. Then the candidate casts Eruption, a sinister pillar of fire that leaves everyone around him in shock except Kaido, who mocks the guy by saying he's strong, but still nowhere near his master's level. Errol slaps the boy on the head to make him learn to stop dragging him into things, and that gives the blonde brat an opening to claim that this so-called master surely knows the difference in strength between them, since not just anyone can melt metal with fire. That said, Errol points toward the mannequin, and when the boy looks in that direction, he notices that it's still standing. The examiner explains that it's because the dummy was made of mithril by the Yellow Institute, and it's practically impossible to melt that rare ore. Kaido uses this to make fun of the kid again, pointing out that he showed up acting all high and mighty but didn't even do what he promised. Errol gives another smack to the brat's head and steps forward when he's called for his turn. The arrogant boy tells him to prove he's really that good, since he claims to be stronger. Errol replies that he never said that, and then Kaido appears behind him, assuring everyone that his master will show what real magic is. Hearing that, Errol gives another knock on the kid's head and finally positions himself to start the test. Since it's the first time he's doing this against mithril armor, he decides to put extra effort into the spell. He then casts a beam of eruption that hits the armor lightly, but nothing happens. The arrogant candidate takes the chance to mock the attempt and go after Kaido, who's left speechless, but then they're both surprised when the mannequin completely melts. Outraged, the brat accuses Errol of cheating, since eruption doesn't melt mithril. The classless boy admits he tweaked his spell a bit. Instead of using the standard force, he compressed the flames to reduce their spread, leaving the brat speechless after being approved. Errol decides to move on to the Blue Institute. Arriving there, Kufa had just hit the mannequin with a water ball. When she sees him, she asks why he's there, since he had decided to take the Red Institute's test. With no time to answer, he's called for the test, then fires several ice spears that shatter the mithril mannequin into tiny pieces. Next, only the Green Institute remains, where he finds Colette crying in the entrance courtyard. She says she's so nervous her legs feel like jelly, so much so that she hasn't even registered for the test yet. She confesses that, unfortunately, she's the type who gets very nervous when she has to perform. And truth be told, her two friends have helped her a lot up to that point, but since this test is individual, now the poor girl feels a bit lost. Speaking of that, she asks what Errol does to calm down in such tense moments, but he replies that he's never felt that way. In fact, he asks the girl to describe the feeling, and she imagines it's anxiety caused by the fear of failure. Errol asks if she's never failed in life, and she assures him it's quite the opposite. She fails so much that she'd rather avoid it altogether. The boy doesn't understand why she feels that way, since he himself also fails and loses many times in front of others. The classless one explains that, in most cases, your life doesn't end because of a failure, and Colette realizes that she can try again later if she doesn't succeed. Understanding what he meant and feeling calmer, the girl thanks him for the advice, and when asked what the Green Institute's exam is like, she says that you must make the whirlpool spin with magic to be approved. Next, when he steps forward to take the test, the classless one focuses, wand in hand, and casts a tornado that devastates the windmill. He thought that thing was made of mithril too, but it seems it's only wood. Either way, it's done for now. As the next candidate, Colette begins to tremble with fear, since she has to take the exam right after that shocking display. However, she looks at Errol and remembers what he said, that failure doesn't determine your life, and that it's almost always possible to try again. Filled with confidence, the girl steps forward and makes the whirlwind spin. After leaving the Green Institute, Errol goes to the Yellow and then the White, and he passes both. Lastly, he arrives at the entrance of the Black Institute and finds it strange how much it looks like a ruin or an abandoned mansion. After walking through the door, he finds a cardboard box with some strange creature hiding inside. Out of nowhere, a visibly agitated woman appears, asking about her dear Gui. Errol says he heard a noise coming from the box, so the woman finds the creature and explains that it's a chimera she created. Then, a skeleton touches Errol on the shoulder from behind and welcomes him. Errol instinctively decapitates the monster, which leaves the poor thing outraged. After picking up her skull and putting it back in place, she explains that she's Latalia, a beautiful member of the Institute's staff. Errol wants to know where the examiner is, and Latalia explains that there's no test to enter there, since most children don't want to learn dark magic anyway, so basically, whoever wants to join can. When leaving the Black Institute, the classless one is found by the trio of boys. After he won the hearts of all three, each of them now wants him to join the institute they belong to. However, he says he won't join any particular one. In fact, he wants to join all 6. By the way, Errol shows everyone the identification card he managed to get from all the schools. Because of that, they ask if the schools didn't talk to each other about it, and Errol explains that they didn't, since apparently the students' information isn't shared between schools. Now, on the other hand, when checking the school's schedules, the classless notices that there are several overlapping classes because of the excess of courses, but it's important to point out that the minimum attendance requirement is only 20%, and that the main focus of the curriculum is the tests. so he could do well if he gets good grades on those exams. Colette comments that it doesn't make much sense to want to take the test without even showing up to class, since the most recent information isn't written in the textbooks, and that to truly go deeper into the subject, it's necessary to listen carefully to what the teachers have to say. In that case, Errol borrows the boys' notebooks so that he can get around this problem, and they're happy to help. However, the kids ask how he's going to handle the remaining schools, and he answers that the black magic school won't be a problem, because when he checked the school's curriculum and saw that it was just a blank sheet of paper, Latalia said it was fine, since they don't have any classes at all at the Black Institute. From what he heard, all the lessons there are learned by the student alone, whatever that means. Anyway, the white and yellow schools are still left, and since he won't have access to the materials for those courses, the only way is to show up to more classes. That said, Kaido invites his buddy to join him for the first class at the Red Institute. Said and done, the two arrive in the classroom, where the boy gets overly excited about his new life. He asks where they're going to sit, and Errol immediately calls dibs on the back row. Curiously, the cocky kid who picked a fight with them during the exam was also in that class, and even though he had lost all the confidence he had after being humiliated in the test, the brat kept raising his tone, insisting that it's impossible for a mage like him to be inferior to a conjurer like Errol. Errol calmly explains that he isn't a conjurer, nor a mage, and much less an archmage, which confuses the boy's head even more. He no longer knows what to believe about this crazy guy. At that moment, the teacher arrives and asks everyone to sit down so the class can begin. But before that, the cocky student introduces himself as Royce and asks what Errol's class is, since he was the only one, besides himself, capable of using eruption during the exam. The teacher reads in his records that the other student is classless, and that information leaves Royce even more disturbed. With no time for more side conversations, the instructor starts the day's lesson, and Kaido quickly realizes, right on the first day, that he's going to struggle with all this theory and math, a ton of bureaucracy just to cast a single spell. Errol, on his part, is frustrated and bored from receiving such a basic lecture about sorcery, and while copying the material into his notebook, he thinks it would be much more practical if conjurers were blessed beforehand with all this information already memorized. Speaking of which, the teacher explains that many students haven't completely memorized this content, and that the reason they can still use magic is because of their natural abilities. On the other hand, having a deep understanding of sorcery makes life even easier, helping the user understand the best moment to use each type of spell and allowing them to control their mana better. Besides that, as students progress, someday they'll be able to turn their basic spells into more advanced powers. Kaido comments that that's what Errol did, and the classless one is surprised to find out that it was considered an advanced technique, while remembering that his father used to mix and shuffle spells every day as if they were pieces of a puzzle. In the next scene, at a training field, while stretching alongside Colette, Errol concludes that he gave the in-person classes a chance, but none of them offered him anything new. Still, he thinks the Green Institute is quite interesting, mainly because of this practical training where they need to practice flight magic. Colette is surprised that her friend has never done that, considering he's already capable of much more advanced things. About that, Errol explains that he had a rather peculiar education like the day he showed interest in flight magic, but his father, who's terrified of heights, ended up forbidding that kind of spell. Speaking of which, the teacher introduces herself to begin the lesson. First of all, the students must imagine themselves levitating on a current of air, maybe even spreading their arms and imagining they're birds, if that helps. Errol figures this exercise is more for those who already possess the flight ability, while he, on the other hand, won't be able to actually perform it just by imagining in his mind what was said. When he looks to the side, he sees Colette overjoyed that she managed to fly for the first time. In fact, she loses control and falls on her backside, which makes everyone look at her, but following her friend Errol's words, she had promised she wouldn't be afraid of making mistakes anymore. And that's exactly what she's putting into practice. Errol reflects that Colette quickly grasped the concept and will probably evolve a lot if she keeps practicing. And since practice is the only path, the classless focuses on finding some different solution to take flight. That solution was conjuring a tornado beneath himself, which worked as a spring to launch him high into the air. In the end, he crashes onto his back with such force that it creates a small crater in the training field. While Colette helps him get up, Another student approaches to point out how terrible the two of them are at what they do. To show how it's done, the guy floats with impressive smoothness and performs an extremely graceful flight without the slightest difficulty. After landing on the ground with everyone's admiring eyes fixed on him, he explains that he focused all his studies solely on the art of flying ever since he became a conjurer. And because of that, he won this race. Errol asks what's this talk about a race, and Colette explains that it's a sport that uses flight magic, where people compete by flying through a course to see who reaches the goal first. Errol finds it fun and volunteers to participate, which makes the human parakeet even more vain, reminding him that to take part in an aerial race, it would be good to learn how to fly first. In that case, Errol promises to train enough to handle the competition. But since there are only 2 months left until the next race, the parakeet assures him it takes 6 months to truly learn to fly, so it would be better for him to focus on facing him only next year. When the student leaves, Errol thinks about which spells he will mix to speed up his flight training, since, according to him, 2 months are more than enough for him to master this technique. At night, after dinner, instead of going to sleep, the trio of young mages gathers at the school. Kyufa explains that he asked for Kaido's presence to have some extra protection, since several rumors have been circulating about a terrifying figure that appears at the school during the night. The boy is scared to death by this story, which makes the girl remember when he couldn't even go to the bathroom alone. It's funny that she's the one pointing fingers, since she herself has been hiding behind Colette ever since the three of them met. Kyufa justifies himself by saying he was only protecting his comrade's rear guard, and then an argument between the two almost begins. But Colette reminds them that it's not a good idea to make noise at this hour. Speaking of which, the ghostly figure the boys were talking about suddenly appears at the window. The apparition opens it, and when Colette starts screaming, we see that it's a hooded man who covers the girl's mouth. Kaido threatens to roast the ghost, but the man removes his hood and reveals that it was Errol all along. He asks what the kids are doing there, and Kyufa asks the same question back, full of anger. In that case, the classless one explains that he's been practicing his flying every single night in this area since the day he decided to take part in the next race. Kaido worries the guy might have a breakdown from taking on so many commitments one after another, but Errol assures him he's taking care of his health. In fact, he was sleeping during most of their conversation. The fact that he can practice while asleep will be the key to mastering the flying technique within the deadline, since that way he restores his mana and energy while developing this ability. Using a well-known saying, it's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Speaking of development, Kaido laments that he hasn't gotten stronger since he started taking classes, so he would like to train on his own, just like the one he calls Master. In that case, Errol recommends that the kid first get rid of this bizarre fear of ghosts. Following the classless one's example, Kyufa and Colette also feel motivated to do extra training to reach a higher level. Later, after saying goodbye to the boys, Errol still feels quite awake, so he goes to the Black Institute, where he finds Latalia at the reception desk as always. Excited, the skeleton asks if the boy came to see her, but he only came to ask permission to access the library. Frustrated, she hands him a card and asks which book he came to look for, and he replies that no book in particular. In fact, he's read all the books he has at home, so he thought it would be good to find some new content about dark magic. Latalia finds this interest curious, since most of the time people just want to keep their distance from that kind of sorcery. The next day, Errol interrupts the teacher's class to tell him that the 3rd line of the enchantment he's writing is wrong. Surprised, the instructor notices the mistake and rewrites the line. Kaido comments that the master is really amazing, and Errol says that spells don't appear in his mind automatically, meaning he has no choice but to memorize each one of them. To memorize so many spells, he had to greatly shorten the size of the enchantments in his head. Hearing the conversation, the teacher finds the classless one's situation interesting and hands him the chalk so that he can write one of his spells on the board. Without hesitation, Errol goes up and shows a shortened version of the teacher's spell, who acknowledges that maybe the spell really can be invoked that way, although it could also result in a dangerous explosion if it fails. Errol, in turn, explains that he doesn't need guarantees when he has divine protection, and even though he sometimes suffers considerable damage, as long as he doesn't die, everything's fine. Recognizing the student's wisdom, the teacher offers him an exam to promote him to the 2nd grade. In the middle of that, Roy steps in to ask if he can take the test too. So, the teacher gathers both apprentices in the test area and points to an iron gate that holds the monsters that will be part of the exam. When each student steps onto the field, a monster will be released and must be defeated with magic before it reaches the conjurer, since that's the rule to pass the test. Finally, the instructor asks who volunteers to go first, and Royce insists on starting. So, when he stands on the line and the gate opens, a giant minotaur comes out, charging furiously toward the human. Even though he's tense because of the creature's strength, the mage doesn't give in to nervousness and casts an eruption at the monster but ends up missing. Errol notices that this power is stronger than what Royce showed in the first exam, and the teacher understands that this is the boy improving with the lessons. Finally, Royce tries in every possible way to hit the minotaur with several consecutive eruptions, but fails miserably in each attempt. The teacher comments that eruption isn't very suitable for a moving target, besides the fact that Royce is clearly anxious about the minotaur's approach, which harms his focus and aim. Suddenly, the monster manages to get close enough to attack the boy, but the moment it does, it suddenly vanishes without leaving a trace. Royce doesn't understand what just happened, while the teacher laughs and reminds him that this is only a school, not the Colosseum. After failing, the student painfully feels the weight of his mistake as the teacher points out that it usually takes 2 years for people to actually be ready for a test of that level, and that Royce actually did pretty well. If he keeps dedicating himself for those 2 years, he'll certainly be able to come back and defeat that minotaur. Realizing he's weaker than all the second-year students, Royce understands that the teacher only allowed him to take the test, knowing he wouldn't pass, just to make him realize he isn't as advanced as he thinks. In short, it was like throwing a bucket of cold water on Royce without losing composure. That lesson made him more humble. He recognized his limits and promised to work with more humility from now on. Next, Errol is sent to the field, and the teacher announces that he will release a monster of the same species as the previous one. However, when the creature leaves its cell, the classless boy wonders how on earth this huge thing could be of the same species as the minotaur. In the midst of that, a girl runs in, apologizing to Professor Bacchus, saying there had been a mistake. One of the superior minotaurs had been mixed in with the others for the exam. However, it was already too late. The minotaur was charging forward with all its speed and strength toward the student. On the other hand, Errol doesn't know anxiety. Completely calm, almost too calm, he conjures 2 spears of fire and shoots them at his target. But the monster manages to dodge with a leap. Seeing that, Bacchus worries that the superior minotaur might not fall into the trap designed to protect students from being attacked. So he tells Errol to leave the field so that he can defeat the threat himself. However, the student insists he can handle it. After all, the fire spears missing was part of his calculation. They turn around and strike the minotaur from behind. Now that his target is immobilized after taking a heavy blow to the joints, the classless boy casts an eruption and finishes the job. The teacher can't believe what he's seeing, since this kind of minotaur is only used to train elite students with extremely rare and advanced classes. It makes him think that maybe they made a mistake when they classified Errol as classless. Either way, the boy has earned it and is promoted to the 2nd year. Later, when the trio of mages meets with Errol, Kaido keeps bragging that his master is the best there is, as if he were the one who passed the test. Speaking of which, even though Errol passed the exam, he looks downcast. After all, this kind of promotion test usually happens only once a year, at the end of the semester, and this one at the Red Institute was an exception because he was recommended by his instructor. Still, the boy fears that the same might not happen at the other schools. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.